The Clean Water Act is a 50-year-old law which created requirements and US EPA programs to help control water pollution. It was passed in the 70s when waters were very polluted. Some rivers would light on fire because so much garbage was in them. And when states all around the country had different protections, and most of them were really weak. So Congress decided to um, create a national law that set a minimal baseline of standards to control pollution for the entire country. The Supreme Court heard a case called Sackett versus EPA, and the case was about what waters does the Clean Water Act protect? And before, the Clean Water Act applied not to every water, but to many waters. And that included rivers, lakes, wetlands, different kinds of streams. Last year, the Supreme Court decided that the Clean Water Act didn't apply to many waters which it had protected for decades. As a result, over half of the wetlands in the country don't have Clean Water Act protections now. And in some places like the Southwest, streams that don't have water in them all of the time throughout the whole year also lost protections. There's two ways it affects people's drinking waters. One is about the quality of our drinking water and how clean it is, and the second is how much drinking water we have. So, in terms of the water being clean and the water quality being good, basically, wetlands act like nature's water filter. They filter out pollutants because of the special qualities of the plants and animals that live in them. And when the wetlands take out a lot of these pollutants, the water that goes from the wetlands underground to drinking water sources or downstream to, big lakes where we get our water from becomes cleaner and easier to treat. So that means when we destroy wetlands, you're basically taking out nature's water filter, and then the drinking water sources are more likely to be contaminated. And the other way this decision impacts drinking water is because in places like the West and the Southwest, where you don't have as much water as you do where I live on the East Coast, a lot of communities don't only depend on lakes and big rivers for sources of drinking water. They also depend on water that's stored underground in aquifers. And in the West, people and cities and communities and states have to be really careful about not taking too much water out because they have to make this water last a long time, because we now have lots of droughts thanks to climate change where it won't rain for days or weeks or even months. And when you destroy these streams that give water to these underground aquifers, then you're basically cutting off a way for these aquifers to refill the water that we need to make last a really long time. This decision endangers not just the water being clean, but also not having enough water. Marginalized communities like Latino communities, tribal communities, African American communities, low income communities. These places are all more likely to be closer to pollution, like Superfund sites. They're more likely to be in areas that have drinking water violations. They're more likely to not have access to basic things like running water and clean plumbing and things like that. And you add on top of that less protections for streams, rivers, and wetlands moving forward. And that means that a lot of communities where Latinos live, you're going to be more likely to see big developers building stuff and building right over the top of wetlands and streams and filling them with gravel and polluting in the process. And they won't have to check with EPA as often because, according to the Supreme Court, they don't have to. Those waters are not protected by the Clean Water Act anymore. These wetlands and seasonal streams, especially out west, but not just out west, wetlands are everywhere in the country, and they're really important for the biodiversity in different places. And I'll give an example in Arizona, just because I've been there recently. There's a river called the San Pedro River, and that's the last undammed river in the Southwest. And it is a very special place for birds. There are about 900 species of birds in North America, and almost half of them at some point stop at the San Pedro River, which is crazy. That's a lot of bird species that stop there. And now that river has lost EPA protections because of this Supreme Court decision. So it'll be easier for developers to build in certain parts of that river and pollute in other parts of that river and take water away from certain parts of that river. And if there's no water, then the birds won't be able to stop there. And the plants that the birds rely on won't be able to grow there. Wetlands especially are really important for mitigating climate change impacts in several ways. When you think of climate change, I don't know about you, but the things I think about are more storms that have in crazy amounts of rain, more hurricanes, more coastal flooding, more sea level rise, and more wildfires. And basically, wetlands, because they don't move, the water in a wetland doesn't move as much, and the soil is able to absorb lots of water like a really big sponge. When there's a lot of rain, or when there's a storm that causes, the water that is in the ocean to flow into like a coastal community, wetlands can absorb some of that water like a sponge. And if there's no wetlands there, where does the water go? Onto streets, which don't absorb any water, or buildings, which don't absorb any water, or sidewalks, which don't absorb any water. And they're also really important to protect against wildfires. Wetlands are wet, and they have lots of water, and even the soil is very moist, so they can help slow down fires, which thrive off dryness. You need clean water to have people enjoy going out on boats, to have them enjoy going to the beach, right? For hunters and anglers, if you take away the wetlands that the birds rely on as part of their migration route, then all of a sudden hunters don't have the birds that they rely on that they've been able to count on at the same time of the year every year for 100 years, because those birds' habitats are gone. And it's the same with fish and angling. Like, small farmers rely on clean water to irrigate their crops. We need to undo what the Supreme Court did, and the only way to do that is to get Congress to fix the Clean Water Act to ensure that it protects more waters like it was supposed to. Right now, the Supreme Court said the Clean Water Act doesn't protect a lot of these waters that don't flow for the whole year. It doesn't protect a bunch of wetlands. So we have to go in there and get Congress to change the Clean Water Act to say, yes, it actually does say that. We have to get it to say that very clearly so that the Supreme Court can't pretend that that's not what the Clean Water Act was supposed to do in the first place. But that might take a while. So in the meantime, we have to work in different states where we live throughout the country to strengthen protections, because when EPA can't protect our waters and wetlands, we have to rely on state governments and state laws. And some states have decent laws and good protections, but other states have really weak protections. And in some cases, even after this Supreme Court decision, states are trying to make their protections even worse. So we have to work together to ensure that these people who are elected at the state level know that we want clean water and we depend on clean water.